So Steve, a common question I get from a lot of my viewers, they constantly ask me, Lance, you've had 2 strip procedures and now I've had an FUE procedure. Should I do strip first? Should I do FUE first? You know, what sort of methodology or surgical procedure should they go first? And I realize this may depend on the patient, but given your years of experience, I wanted to ask you what you feel about that.
Sure, great question. I mean, I know there's a lot of confusion out there. Again, all leaning back toward the marketing and advertising for mainly really the FUE. I think some of your viewers may get confused because you'll be watching a doctor that's done a phenomenal job with a linear procedure, and then they'll say, okay, that's for me, that's what I want. And then of course the next choice on YouTube is a doctor that's doing FUE, and the guy's head shaved and he's some ex-football player that looks like he's got a phenomenal result, and you're saying, well, I want that. You know, so what do? I mean, why, if it were possible to move, you know, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, 10,000 hairs in FUE, I think that there would be no longer any need for any linear procedures, quite frankly, when I'm being facetious.
And by hair, you mean total hair and not just grafts, right?
Yeah, I always talk in total hairs because
Okay.
I think hairs is much more important because we lose our hair, we don't lose our grafts.
Yeah.
So I won't get into the graft hair thing right now, but bottom line is that my job, at least appointing myself at my job, that it's important for me to make sure that the patients out there, right now it's your viewers, get the straight scoop, meaning that there's pros and cons to both procedures. And I think that there's some confusion sometimes when you talk to maybe a patient educator from a doctor that does one particular procedure, and he's of course going to advise you do that procedure.
Yeah.
Then you flip and go to the other procedure, and oh, by the way, that doctor and his patient educator only do the other procedure. And he had told me absolutely without question that this is the only procedure for me. And that confuses people. So I guess to start, Lance, we can talk about a few doctors out there, and again, doctors that I have in my network. One, of course, that did your procedure yesterday, Dr. McGrath, who does all the different procedures, which is very important to me in representing him as one of my doctors, of course. And why is that the case? Because when a patient comes in to meet with the doctor, we go through the discovery, we talk about preventative treatments, and then based on all those different variables that can change, and what are those points, meaning hair type, hair loss, genetics, all that stuff. Then we make a decision from a pro and con standpoint based on which procedure would work best for the patient. So the patient then sits back from an objective standpoint and makes a decision. I also take it to a whole nother level when I'm by myself with the patient and educating them on the science behind the procedures. To me, and this is how I started out going back to my dermatology magazines back in the mid-90s, is I needed to find out the science behind this stuff. I don't want to be sold a doctor that's the best artist in the history of the world, that does the best hairlines or the best crowns. I don't want to be told that by a patient educator until I get a chance to review that doctor's work. But in my opinion, I'm going to start off for myself, educating myself from a scientific standpoint, not marketing and advertising. There's a article in Washington Post, the Washington Post, and it shows that Turkey is, you know, the #1 country where people are flocking to get hair transplants, and it's all FUE. And they have a photo of, you know, a bunch of nurses, of course, not the doctor, removing FUE grafts out of the back of the head. And to me, and I've got it saved on my computer, there's no sebaceous gland. They're all tiny little thin skeletonized grafts. So of course you're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 guys that have very little hair loss where they shave the head and they do FUE, and then there's our Turkey patient. Doesn't he look great? For $3,500, come on in, fly to Turkey. And then you wonder why you didn't get that same result. That's because FUE is not the choice for you if you're a class 5 guy or a class 6 guy or a class 7 guy. Not in my world. And I'm not trying to flip people out of FUE into the linear procedure. I just want to make sure that we do our job as professionals in the industry to educate the patient properly.